attorney, because that's on the 8-year fight to stop a major polluting cement plant from coming to North Carolina, and he was one of the main reasons that they're no longer coming here, which is a big environmental win for all of us here in North Carolina. But with that, I'm going to introduce Geoff Gisler. Jeff.
He showed my critical. So 150 something ounces.
In the
What you need? Okay.
This is it?
Yeah.
That was
To the town, and to the, not to the individuals. I mean,
So they saved the guy who's supposed to explain the environmental impact statement last. The document that everyone's been dreading or avoiding. So save till 8:30, talking about the law and technical engineering. All right, let's do it. And Tom, I apologize because there are a lot. So first, I just want to give a very cursory overview of why we even have an environmental impact statement. And the environmental impact statement is required by the National Environmental Policy Act, which is a fairly simple law that is intended. Go ahead and click the next one. So why do we have an Environmental Policy Act? The real purpose is public disclosure. It's basically if the federal government is going to authorize someone to do something, then the public has a right to know what's going to be done, have the right to know what the other alternatives are, and they have the right to weigh in and ask questions. The other purpose is to inform decision makers. So it's to make sure that through that process, the folks at the Corps, the folks at other agencies like marine fisheries or the state agencies, if they have the opportunity to take in information from the public and to get a complete picture. The purpose is also to enable those agencies to comply with other laws. In this case, the law that is most important here is the Clean Water Act. And it's important because what the Clean Water Act says is if you want to do something like build a terminal in Groin, you can only do it if it is the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. Practicable is a horrible word that somebody thought was good to put in the regulation. That means it's capable of being done, taking into account economic and technological feasibility. So if you can do it, it's not too expensive, and it has less environmental impact, you have to choose that option. You can't say, but I would rather do something else if it has more environmental impact. Okay, next. And so how do we get to that? How do we get to that public disclosure? How do we get that? How do we get informed decision makers? How do we provide that foundation to comply with other laws? First, NEPA requires you to assess the environmental baseline. Because if you don't know what you have, you can't know what the effects are going to be of any proposed project. Whether you do nothing and you continue with what you have, or whether you do one of the alternatives. It also requires the agency, I mean, here's the Corps, and the documents prepared by a consultant, but it requires the agency to look at a number of different alternatives. One of those has to be the no action alternative, basically continuing the status quo. And here it's a little bit confusing. I'll talk about it in a second about no action and status quo are not quite the same here. But when you look at the alternatives in the EIS, you have to look at the environmental impacts and the economic impacts. So that way you can do that assessment of practicability. And you can evaluate whether it is the least environmentally damaging practical alternative. We have a draft environmental impact statement. And I'm not going to go through it in limited amount of time, so it's going to be a sprint through it. I'm going to try to highlight what I think are the most relevant things for y'all to consider as you go forward and having this public discussion. The first thing is how that environmental baseline is assessed and the process that the consultant and the Corps have used to evaluate the environmental baseline and evaluate the effects of the alternatives. And they did that through a model. They ran the model for 4 years and compared the results of doing nothing and 6 alternatives overall. They only ran the model for 4 years, and so we think that's a big problem. Especially if you're looking at a project where you're looking at a 30-year commitment, at least a 30-year commitment. Really, people aren't pulling out terminal groin. So this is a long-term commitment, and you're getting a very narrow glimpse of what the potential benefits and risks are through this modeling analysis. The EIS evaluated 6 alternatives. The first one it's called the no action. It's really maintaining the status quo. So what that would be is the town providing nourishment like the Corps has done on the East End over the last 15 years. So it's not actually no action, it's continuing with every 2-year beach nourishment projects. The second alternative is the real don't do anything alternative. No sandbags, no beach nourishment, no anything. The third alternative is just beach nourishment. The fourth alternative is beach nourishment and managing the inlet through dredging. The fifth alternative was a short groin. It was a shorter groin closer to the houses. That one is not the preferred alternative. So that one I won't talk any about that one. I'll talk about the sixth one. This is the preferred alternative in the environmental impact statement. This is the proposed project. It's the intermediate groin, 1,000 feet, 700 feet going out from the dune, 300 feet of anchor, 120-foot T section at the end. And so the 2 alternatives that I'm going to focus on are 6 and 2, because they're the ends. 2 is the worst case scenario. If you do nothing, so we just let erosion do what it's going to do, and we let the inlet do whatever it does. That's kind of the worst case scenario, and 6 is the best case scenario. If we build this groin, what's the best we get out of it? So those are the 2 I want to focus on. This slide, it's a whole lot of words, but this is what is described as the purpose of the project in the EIS. And I'm putting it up here for a couple reasons, because as Andy mentioned, this is if you read this, you kind of think of it as being an existential threat to the island. I mean, this is pretty broad. There are a lot of things listed here that we'll see are not actually at issue based on the analysis in the EIS. This is a very broad statement, but when we dig into it, we see that the actual difference between that alternative 2 and alternative 6 is very, very narrow. So the potential benefit of building this terminal groin is very limited, we'll see. But the other thing I want to point out here is what we're talking about. We're talking about ongoing and chronic erosion. Dr. Riggs mentioned that storms are critical to the system. This is not looking at storms. The model does not consider storm impacts. They don't model storms, they don't assess storms. They're only looking at chronic erosion, so the day-to-day normal cycle stuff. And although it describes ongoing and chronic erosion, when we look at those rates, and I'll have a graph in a minute, the historical rates at the east end of the island are 5 to 7 feet a year. The model that was used predicts 20 feet a year. So we're not even really talking about the experienced erosion on Holden Beach. The model sets up a different scenario that creates much higher rates of erosion. Next slide. This is the historical erosion data. This is what's prepared by DCM. The dotted line is at 2003. It was revised in 2011. And so I put this up here because it really helps to narrow the issue a little bit. So it really helps us focus in on what we're talking about in this EIS and what the potential threat is. And I think it goes well with Andy's discussion of the 30-year risk, because when you look at it, down here erosion is kind of significant, 5 to 7 feet a year. This is where it gets serious, but as you get closer down and towards the central reach, the rate of erosion that's been historically observed is much lower. And so what we're talking about here is really the east end. And the way that the EIS approaches it is it's from what they call Station 40 East. So it's right in here, east. Down here, and we'll see it in the modeling, they're not claiming that this terminal groin is going to do anything down here. They don't model it far enough in the future to really assess benefits, but then we'll see that the model, the 4-year model, there's no difference between doing nothing and building the terminal groin. So we're really only focused on these areas that are 5 and 7 feet. Next slide, please. And we can see that in the models. And I'll tell you, I've zoomed in on some of these images from the EIS so that you can see them a little bit better. I've been careful to not distort them in any ways so as to maintain their integrity. But you can see what I'm talking about is, so these are all the different modeled shorelines. Up here, there's some variation. Once you get down to here, there's really not from what they've modeled. So I think Doug is right. You know, the EISs tend to paint a rosier picture of the preferred alternative, if there is one. And even here, there's no claim that the central reach is going to be benefited by this project. Next slide, please, Tom. Oh, I had circles. So you can see down here the rates are the same. Next one, please, Tom. Okay, one more. And this is the area we're going to focus on. So we can see it's not really, we're not talking about a big chunk of the island. We're talking about the very east end. We're not talking about all the east end. We're talking about this. But what we'll see is when we look at the modeling results a little bit closer, we're not even talking about all of this. We're actually only talking about these few houses in here. Next slide, please, Tom. This is the modeling result for the terminal groin proposal. And you can't really see it very well, but this is the predicted shoreline after 4 years. It comes up under these houses, right up to the back doors.
With the groin, correct?
With the groin. This is best case scenario. Most protection provided with the groin after 4 years. Next slide, please. And so you see that the EIS describes these properties as being impacted, even with the terminal groin. So it's 16 properties, 11 developed. That's what you get for $34 million. Next slide, please, Tom.
11 total properties, or 16 total properties.
16 total properties, and I'm going to put the numbers up here in a second. So 16 total properties, 11 that have been developed. Yes.
Does anyone, excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
this may not be the time to ask this question, but in no instance so far have I heard anyone say what has been spent on renourishment, say in the past 30 years on the east end of the island.
So
And to compare with the 15 million the gentleman from Western Carolina would. I would like to know how much totally has been spent on renourishment on the east end.
I don't have the dollar figures. I can tell you how later I'm going to get to how much renourishment there's been.
Okay,
But I don't have the dollars.
okay.
Dolly, the annual beach monitoring report lists the projects and the amount of sand, but it's been really hard to get to the dollars.
Because of the grants and
Because of the
everything.
grants and sharing and piggybacking on, dredging projects. But we're gonna try to get that.
Okay,
I don't know if we go back 30 years, but we go back probably 15.
okay.
So Tom, if you'll go to the next slide. Wait, no, not yet. We go back one. Yeah. So this is the takeaway here. That what we're talking about is that when we're looking at the EIS, I want to make it clear that none of the alternatives protect all the houses. None of the alternatives protect all the infrastructure. So we're not talking about these houses are all impacted under the terminal groin proposal. Next slide, please, Tom. So this is the model if you do absolutely nothing. No sandbags, no nourishment, no anything after 4 years. The shoreline is a little further back. But if we look at it, Tom, will you click the button, please? So these are the ones that are, these are the houses that are impacted even with the terminal groin. So they're still impacted without the terminal groin, without doing anything. The difference is these next set of houses, Tom, these are the houses that will additionally be impacted if nothing is done. So there are about 5 or 6 houses there. The numbers I'll show up, I'll put up there in the EIS. Don't like to match my counting on the picture. There's about 6 houses here. That's the difference between building the terminal groin and doing nothing at all.
That's with no beach renourishment.
That's no beach renourishment, no sandbags, no anything, based on the modeling in the EIS.
What is the time period we're talking about?
4 years. They only went out 4 years.
What is the blue line representing?
The blue line, I believe, is the initial shoreline, or initial mean high water.
And there's no storm impact in any of
No storm impacts have been were considered in the model. So we're not talking about that sweeping. The real question for the town is not that sweeping statement about protecting businesses and really the whole community. It's about how do you protect these houses? And that's a very different question than has been asked so far. And I think, and the reason I wanted to point this out and focus in on this is because if you ask that question, if you acknowledge that some of these houses are not going to be protected, then you can ask a narrower question. You can look at different answers and look at different alternatives, and that hasn't been done in this EIS. So this is what the real issue here. Next slide, please. And I just want to throw up some numbers to show you what to summarize the EIS's findings. So we can look at, they summarize parcels affected, assessed value, and cost of the projects. So there are other figures in the EIS. They're summarized in charts. These are the ones that I think tell the story. And now we'll go through the alternative 2 first, which is if you do nothing, no beach nourishment, no sandbags. 28 total properties are affected. 19 of those properties have been improved. Now that number includes a couple houses in Dunescape, which to me they don't look like they're affected. The mean high water line is not to the vegetation yet. So I think that number is a little bit high, but we don't need to dispute that to make the point here tonight. Next slide. So the assessed value of the properties that would be impacted if nothing is done is $5.18 million. Next slide, please. And the cost of doing that is $0. So if you spend $0, the lost value is the assessed value of the $5.18 million. Next. Alternative 6, building the terminal groin. It reduces the overall impact by 12 properties, the impact to developed properties by 8 houses, and next slide, please, Tom. And reduces the impact to assessed value by $3 million. It costs $34.43 million. Now that's not the net present value. I didn't. That's also in there. It's lower because it's reduced by discount rate. But that's the point I wanted to. That's what I think. These, like I mentioned earlier, these are the 2 endpoints: doing nothing and building a terminal groin. 8 properties, $3 million for a cost of $34 million. Yes, John.
At what point in this process was the decision made alternative 6 is the preferred choice?
I don't remember exactly when it was made. They modeled the shorter groin. It actually did perform a little bit better on the west side, but the erosion was more severe on the east side.
And who made that decision that is the preferred method?
I assume that the town did. I mean, it's the town's preferred alternative. So I don't know how that decision was made, but
The Corps of Engineering didn't have any issue in deciding which.
the Corps doesn't choose. So
So we must have chosen.
Yes, the town. the town chose it as a preferred.
One other point, I think Dr. Reed mentioned something about the stabilization. I mean, the inlet had not changed, but nowhere tonight have you all talked about the impact of the groin on the inlet, which is a factor in revenue for this island,
That's a great,
recreationally, you know.
it's a great point. I actually meant to start with that because, you know, our interest in the Coastal Federation's interest and in these projects, and the reason we care about these inlets is because if you go out there, it is a great recreational resource. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a second, but it's a great recreational resource. It's great habitat. It's really essential habitat for a lot of species of wildlife, a lot of birds that have adapted to exactly that dynamic system that's there. And so, thank you for asking that question because that's why I'm here, because of those recreational values and environmental values. You might play on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom, next slide, please. About nourishment. So looking at beach nourishment, they summarize the last 15 years in the EIS. And so we can look at the amounts. And looking at the amounts east of, looking east of Station 40, next bullet, it's about, when you do the math, it's not all, some of the projects go from a little bit farther than the east end as described here, so it's hard to get the exact number, but it's about less than 40,000 cubic yards a year of beach nourishment. And that's with, I wasn't here post-Hannah, but I understand y'all got hit pretty hard. And so that's with the pretty significant renourishment after Hannah, 100,000 cubic yards. Alternative 6, the terminal groin alternative, requires 150,000 cubic yards every 4 years. So just under 40,000 cubic yards a year. So there's not going to be, based on what's been done and what is proposed under Alternative 6, there's not a significant difference in the amount of beach nourishment. As you know, one of the things that was mentioned in the part, and as Tom mentioned in his earlier story, obviously the beach is crucial here. And so one of the claims, or one of the purposes set out was to protect the recreational beach. And so I do want to talk about that for a minute. And we can see that by zooming in back on that model result for Alternative 6 with the terminal groin. And it kind of shows what the impact on the recreational beach is. Again, the red line is where the mean high water is. So you'll essentially have no recreational beach here. The beach, you can see the blue line and the red line. The recreational beach would get a little bit wider with right next to the terminal groin. But what we see all on every place that we've looked at it, on the inlet side of the terminal groin, you lose that recreational beach. That erodes. You can't see it in 4 years of modeling. It's one of the limitations of doing it for such a short period of time. You don't see those long-term impacts of that inlet erosion. So you're trading the inlet beach that you have now for the beach next to the groin right here. Because the groin is about right here. Next slide, please, Tom. To summarize, and again, we do have some time for questions. It's a big document with a lot of things. I tried to pull out what I thought were the most relevant things that I could put in for 20 minutes. But these are my conclusions and my takeaway points for tonight. And the first is that if I were building this, or if I were proposing this, I would have a lot more questions about what we can expect to happen than you can answer with this EIS. The modeling that was done doesn't get there. It's 4 years, and it's a long-term commitment. So if this thing is built, if the groin is built, it's going to be there. So I want to know more about what that means for the long term, and not just for 4 years. And so this is one of the real weaknesses in the EIS market. If you're talking about a long-term project, looking at it for 4 years is not sufficient. Next slide, please. But if we assume all of that is right, the difference between doing nothing at all spending no money and building a terminal Groin and committing to that long-term investment is based on their modeling 5 or 6 houses. Andy summarized the fiscal impacts better than I can, but I think we can all look at better ways to deal with 5 or 6 houses when building a terminal Groin. A better way to protect those houses or make those underperform.
I want to make sure I understand something. You're talking about, with the Groin, you're still putting about 40,000 cubic yards of sand on the beach as nourishment, is that right?
Yes.
And that sand would be going to the west of the Groin, is that right, basically?
Be
In
going
front of the
west.
house. So, is there any modeling that is done that says, how much difference would there be if we didn't build a Groin and just put 40,000 cubic yards of sand on that same? Isn't that what we're doing?
That's what you're doing now. And there was some modeling done. I used the 2 endpoints to try to make, to I thought that kind of thing. I didn't include the.
But that is a lot of sand is going there.
But yes.
Important to us, too, and they aren't discussing.
Another follow-up question to
They're
that.
discussing
I also understand that the Groin would require maintenance, placing sand on the east side of the Groin, is that correct?
A smaller amount, I can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's not, most of the sand is to the west.
One of the things I think that's really important is, and one of the things that we heard a lot of during the Rich Inlet session that you did, was the potential damage on the east side of this groin, the potential risk on the east side of this groin of loss of beach there. And I didn't see a real pictorial of that, and I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when you put these in, Audubon, we work a lot with Audubon, and they look all the way up and down the Atlantic coast, and in every instance where they looked at terminal Groin, you don't have a spit on the east, on the inlet side of it. And so you can't, I couldn't put a picture up here because the model didn't go that far. It didn't, the Rich Inlet one, it went, I think it was 6 or 7 years, 7 years. So we had a little bit more of that. Here, 4 years, we didn't get as much of that.
Right.
But that's the pattern. And that's what you see if you look at different terminal Groins across the coast. I mean, when you look at Fort Macon, there's a little bit of sand because they constantly renourish it. When you look at Pea Island, there's a little bit of sand because they're putting millions of cubic yards of sand back on the beach. So the pattern is the inlet side over the shore.
This might be a question for Dr. Riggs, but I thought I heard him say that when you put a terminal Groin, you end up starting the beach further down. Like there could be more erosion further down the beach.
Let's get everybody up here and let you all ask questions, right?
I have one more conclusion. And that's about the beach nourishment and the recreational beach. Based on the figures that are in the EIS, you're not going to see a significant reduction in beach nourishment requirements, and the recreational beach will just be transported and shrunken from the east side of the Groin to the little bit on the west side.
Cool, stay here.
I will.
And Stan, you get the first question. Yes. So ask anything to anybody. If you know who you want to ask, just let us know, and if not, we'll try to route it to the right person. And you go first.
Start then. I thought that you mentioned, when we were talking about the terminal line, that our concern seems to be the east end erosion, which I thought you said that the terminal line itself would cause erosion further down. So that we're talking about further down, Holden Beach will suffer because of the terminal
The
line.
reason I showed you
Could you repeat the question so we can tell what the question was?
Yes.
She said that the focus has been on the east end, but Dr. Riggs said that with the groin in place, erosion would get worse downstream to the west. Is that indeed the case?
Okay.
the reason I showed you the headland is because a headland works just like a natural groin. And what it does automatically is concave produces concavity in the beach. And it's dramatic. As you get away from the rock, it makes that headland. And it's, if you put a rock structure out there, it's gonna do exactly the same thing. It's gonna, the inside of the inlet, first of all, you've gotta remember that you're gonna mine the sand out of the inlet. That's where you're gonna get sand. So you're not gonna be building a lot of new shoals out there. Plus, you're producing a pipe, so the hydraulic head is just gonna slush right through there. You're not gonna build anything out there. And particularly in a storm, it's gonna flush it out completely. And I didn't point this out, but there's a node point. If you look at the slides that you showed, there's a nodal point right at the end of those houses where the road turns, I think, if I remember right, where there's a very slight change in the angle of the beach. And that's probably where you're going to see that thing shift further to the west. And there's a perfect node point on the Atlantic Beaufort Inlet, where Fort Macon Beach and Atlantic Beach come together, where the sediment erosion has really accelerated down from there, so that it's and we see it on Pea Island as well, where you get past the first 3 miles and it's taken the island away. It's gone.
So your conclusion would be that a terminal groin might help a little bit in the east end, but could cause problem further down the beach for the rest of the homeowners.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, how severe that is comes back to this whole question of the storm dynamics, which, as was pointed out, none of these models deal with storm dynamics. And the driver in a coastal system is not the day-to-day process. When you're sitting out here with your blanket on the beach, nothing's happening. It's when the storm events and during your high tide events and so forth that you're dealing with responses.
As a follow-on to that, though, it seems in my quick read of the EIS, very quick, it's absent of any true risk and uncertainty, much that you're talking about. So for decision makers, it sounds like they came in with half a loaf and not a full loaf of information to make their decision. They don't understand what the range of uncertainty really is. This is environmental uncertainty, as well as the risks associated to the cost, to the people. It seems totally void of that. I couldn't find it.
I think that's right.
Did y'all hear that in the back?
No.
The basic point being that you can look as far as you want through the EIS and not find really any direct dealing with the risk or uncertainty attached to any of the important dimensions. Jeff, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think one of the questions you should ask and should be asked as you look through this thing is okay, we have this projected shoreline. How likely is that to be what actually happens? And I mean, we can look at some of those factors around it. Like, well, if the model's predicting 20 feet of erosion a year, and that doesn't match the historical rate, then that suggests it's not going to be very accurate. I mean, if the historical rate is 5 feet a year, and the model says it's going to be 20 feet a year, that suggests that something is not working right. Even if you are able to exclude storms. So I think there are definite questions about the approach taken in the EIS, and Dr. Riggs and others with that kind of expertise can really get into that. I try to assuming they're right, assuming that that's right. I still think that
Mother Nature is right.
Yes.
And you don't know what right is until it happens.
How about this lady over here on the right?
Who can tell us who's going to pay for this?
Who can tell us who's going to pay for this? I believe the correct word would be y'all.
I haven't heard you mention the viability of the inlet for navigation.
will Groin potentially in the 4-year study, which is pretty short for Mother Nature, but is the navigation going to continue to need the attention that it's been getting? Or will it be more problematic or less, or you just gonna?
If you can tell me what the storm dynamics are gonna be, I can answer that. If we go into a slow storm period, then you'll start to accumulate more sand in the inlet. If we go into a higher storm period of higher storm dynamics, you're gonna flush more of that sand out of there. It's just, the whole idea of an inlet is, it's sort of, I use the analogy of a safety valve. And it really takes the pressure off that storm surge. And if you've got lots of inlets, which you do on these types of islands, that lets the water go this way rather than this way. And when it goes that way, you're basically blowing it out. And then if you have a sand supply, it's going to come back. And it'll come back to an equilibrium point. So this whole business of doing this is totally dependent on the storm dynamics and the long-term sediment input to the system. And then you complicate it if you're going to mine then that sand goes on the beach. And the other thing that most people won't think about is when you come in with a 10-foot storm surge, you got 20, 30-foot waves out there. That sand's in suspension. And naturally, it would go over the island and onto the back marshes, building this way and this way. But with a wall of houses, it can't. And so it goes back out and goes onto the continental shelf. And so there's a net loss in that process. And it's the beach in the long term that's going to start to get steeper and require more frequent nourishment just to begin to hold a beach there. And if you start talking about the decadal scale, it's a losing process. And think back to when we started to develop this island. It wasn't very long ago, a few decades ago, okay? And so all of North Carolina coast is pretty, there were a lot of mom and pop places here, but they were scattered and water could go in and around them. But of the type of development we have now is almost a condominium, what we call a condo head almost. And so the beaches are responding faster and getting steeper, and we're losing more of that sand. So it requires more nourishment as we go forward.
Did anyone look at the reasonableness of the costs in the draft environmental impact statement? And the reason I ask this is I just read a report that the Ocean Isle Beach proposed terminal Groin is $46 million for a 750-foot terminal Groin. And I realize it's not all the same, but Holden Beach is 1,000 feet for $34 million. Andy, you used in your projection initial cost of $5 million. I think the draft EIS has a proposed initial cost of $2.5 million. The Baldhead Island terminal Groin was much higher than both of those numbers. So are we just starting with numbers that are in the ballpark of reasonable?
I think you have to be careful of what you're comparing. So my initial cost of $5 million was the cost of the actual Groin itself, plus the cost of nourishment at the time that Groin was constructed. Some of the other numbers may be, and that's then the net present value. My bottom line number is net present value, so brought into current numbers.
And I'm not questioning your numbers so much as the numbers in the report that a decision maker would look at and say, I look at this, are they even reasonable? Is $2.5 million for an initial construction cost a reasonable number for a 1,000-foot terminal Groin with 120-foot T-head at the end? Are the costs to re-nourish every 4 years reasonable? Are they too high? Are they too low? Do we even know that? Because the economics in the report are so flawed that one of the alternatives has the net present value higher than the projected cost over a 30-year period. That's not how net present value calculations work. So I just have a lot of doubts, a lot of questions about the validity of the numbers there. And has anyone really spent any time looking at any of them?
Well, I would say yes and no. We talked about uncertainty. The whole idea of building this Groin and nourishing this beach is rife with uncertainty. These predictions and these models are developed to provide an idea of what may happen if something is done. The thing about models is, and go back to the question about modeling, is the models are very complex and very expensive and produce really, really nice looking products, but they're always wrong. And the reason they're always wrong is because when they model what's going to happen, they take every possible scenario they can think of, put it in, run it, and come out with what they think will happen. And as soon as that groin is built, some storm is going to come that was never modeled because they can't predict the future. And something is going to happen, and they will say, well, we couldn't predict that. And you can see that everywhere. You can see that at Ocean Isle Beach, the Load Inlet, where they have to be mining the inlet for the Nourishment project in 2001. Bogue Inlet and Emerald Isle, there was some errors in the modeling there. North Topsail Beach, go ask North Topsail Beach what they think about the modeling in New River Inlet. You can go anywhere where a model is done and see what happened, and it's going to be different. But they use these models because they show what they want you to see. That's something to keep in mind. And the costs are different. The cost of building a groin, $2.5 million, looks like it's pretty on target considering what other groins similar to that cost. But there's so much more complexity to just putting these rocks out there. So they have to bring a dredge, or they have to bring a barge. It'll change the cost. There's no telling what the actual cost is. But as we heard earlier, this EIS was developed to support a terminal groin. It wasn't, let's look at all the options and pick the best one. So you have to keep that in mind too. So everything that's presented there is presented for a reason.
Can you tell us anything about the legal aspects and what's going to happen and who's going to make the decision and when will it be? And I mean, we're talking, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Part of the process is in the hands of the Corps. They will, the draft EIS is out, they will take comment, they will produce a final EIS, and the Corps will decide which of any of these things can be permitted. And it's that decision that's bound by the language that Geoff was talking about the least damaging practicable alternative. In terms of who's going to pay for it and how that will be determined, that's part of the political process here at Holden Beach, and so you certainly have a voice in that.
When we went to the first meeting that took place here, that we were aware of, I came away saying it's a done deal. I mean, the Corps, everybody had all these reports and they spent hours and just untold time doing it. What's to make us think it's not a done deal?
I can't think of anything,
Really?
but I'm cynical.
What do you mean, you can't figure it?
So the things that still have to happen, there has to be a final environmental impact statement. There has to be a
What?
final-
I can't hear you.
There has to be a final environmental impact statement. We think that is coming soon. There has to be a record of decision by the Corps on which alternative they pursue, or they approve. They have to issue a permit. The town also has to apply to the Division of Coastal Management for a permit. That will go through a public comment process. And
There will be a public hearing.
and there will be a public hearing. They'll have to make a decision. And all of this is also dependent on the town continuing to pursue it. So all of that is at the town's, is within the town's control.
Who conducts that public hearing that he referred to?
The Division of Coastal Management.
Does?
Yeah.
And do they come here and do that?
I'm fuzzy on my camera and public hearing rules, so.
But even beyond all that, after all that has happened, isn't it ultimately the governing body of the town of Holden Beach will make the decision about this? Meaning the 5 commissioners, and
Yeah.
depending on how it's financed?
They would have to, because it involves
That will be-
finances.
They will make the decision within the boundaries set by the Corps' permit process. So
they can't choose to do something that the Corps won't give them a permit for.
Right.
But once the permit's out, then they can decide whether or not and how to make that happen. We're told that we can have 2 more questions, and then we gotta let the people with young children go home.
Yes. Why can't it be put on the ballot for all the property owners on Holden Beach?
Why can't it be put on the ballot for all the property owners in Holden Beach? I don't know.
I believe the state, the law that allows the ones, I have to check on this, has a provision that says public money can't be used to build these without a referendum.
So that's only for limited sources.
I think what's important, what y'all are bringing up, and what we're all here for tonight, is to become educated. And what you can do now is do more homework. If there's going to be there will be a public hearing when the final EIS is released. There'll be a comment period, and then we'll hold a public hearing. That's again your chance to go before your elected officials, the Corps, the applicants, and make your case. Then, if you continue to have questions, you need to go to your elected officials and talk to them about it. Not only your local elected officials, your county commissioners, and your state elected officials. This is something that's going to affect Holden Beach forever. It's something that's going to affect your pocketbooks for a long time.
Tonight's last question.
Our county commissioner feels very strongly about this and supports it very much. Has been our board meeting to say so he would not be the person you would want to talk to about it. The one who
Well, they are voted in office, and the more people that sit in front of him and voice their opinion, the more power you have.
You gotta remember, a lot of homeowners around here are non-resident homeowners.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be able to vote.
That's true.
But they can go talk to their town officials as a property owner that has property and pay taxes on Holden Beach and tell them their concerns.
I don't know how many real estate agents are in here, but did y'all realize that this goes through your property taxes, high as they are now, they're gonna shoot way up. Now, how's that gonna affect selling a house? How's that gonna affect the rent that you must charge for people come in for weekends? It's gonna greatly affect it.
Right.
Just one last question.
One quick one. One with a short
Quick,
answer.
it's for Geoff. Is there any legal process through petition where the homeowners of Holden Beach can be heard?
Taxpayers.
Why don't you ask
Taxpayers, not voting members, all taxpayers on Holden Beach.
I would suggest, Rhonda, that you go to town hall and ask that question, because they don't know the laws here.
Right.
And
But Jeff's a lawyer.
Well, you've got lawyers sitting here who live on Holden Beach
Oh, that's
also.
true, that's true. There's one.
Y'all, it's 9 o'clock. What I want to do is thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Geoff Gisler with the Southern Environmental Law Center. They all traveled a long way. I want to thank the Property Owners Association for helping putting this on, Rhonda Dixon, and Tom, and Vicki, and everyone else. And again, this is something we're going to be following. All the presentations will be put on our website. They'll be put on the property owner's website, the slideshows, and the voice recording, so you'll be able to look at them again. Thank y'all.
Right. Stop.
I'll stop it.